So, yep, it's 3:30. So I'll get started on my replatforming presentation. Okay, so yes, part of our race to the future, I'm just going to take a look at Plex and replatforming. So as you all know with Plex, kind of one of the reasons probably why you all went for it is because it allows you to separate your business rules from the platforms. So you can just write it once, regenerate for different platforms. And it is something it does quite well. So, but some of the older platforms like WinC are beginning to show their age. So I'm just going to take a look at what platforms are available and what approaches we can take to replatform if you're considering that. So Andrew Leggett, I'm from CM First, and I've been using Plex for more than 25 years now. So I've pretty much worked in most of the variants available. So I'll be sharing my opinions on a few things. So yeah, if I say something about WinC or something like that, don't take offense. It's just my opinion. But I'd be quite happy to have feedback if you have various things to say. So I'll be talking about, well, the starting position, kind of where you currently are with your existing applications. Then take a look at Plex Platforms, which are each one, and look at the pros and cons. And then take a look at the replatforming process, what approaches we can take, and what preparation you can take right now if you're planning maybe in a year, 5 years, whatever, to replatform. Okay, so just to start off, you've got Plex applications, and your applications are valuable. It's not just an icon that you click on your desktop to start up. It's made of years of user and business requirements. Lots of meetings, lots of discussions have gone into building your application exactly how the users and the business requires it. You have your business model in there, so all the relationships between all the different entities is modeled. You got your action diagram code, which addresses all the requirements, enhancements, bug fixes, and everything. Every line of code was written for a reason. You've got your database, got years of historical data, and that's like immense value. And of course, you've got your user knowledge. You've got users who use your applications every day, and yeah, they know certain areas so well, and they expect it to work in certain ways. So hopefully the system works exactly how they want, but there's value in that. And of course, you've got your developer skill sets. So people who've been working with the model, the application, they know the business, they know the model, they know how to make changes, where to make the enhancements, etc. So your application is valuable. So the advantage of replatforming with Plex is that it lets you build on your assets. So you still got, you'll still be using the same application, you'll just be using it on a different platform. So all those requirements are still in there. The business model, that hasn't changed. All your code will still work more or less the same way. All the enhancements are in there. The database you can continue to use. And of course, the user knowledge, if you replatform, then your users already know how to use the application. So there's not much retraining involved. And of course, there's the developer skill sets. And this was brought up this morning in the round table where people talked about basically moving to a new platform, but they said the value is that they were able to keep essentially the same database, the same model, and yeah, didn't have to retrain. So replatforming with Plex is like an obvious step to take if you're looking for a new platform. So the platforms we have available, got WinC, C++. We have Java Client, which is the Java Swing UI. We have CM web client, which is built on top of the Plex Java generator, but provides HTML, JavaScript, CSS, front end, runs in a browser. More recently, we have .NET, the C# front end, and of course is the green screen, the 5250. On the server, we have WinNTC, works with WinC. You can also have Java servers, and I think one of the most common ones is the RPG4 System I platforms, and you can also have .NET Server as well. So just looking at each one, so I'll start with WinC, which was originally the only platform that Plex supported back in the days when it was very new. But as I said before, it's beginning to show its age. It requires 32-bit compilers, runtime. It's a desktop application, so it requires installation. There's probably system ways of installing on user desktops. There's ways around that, but it still requires installation and updates. It also may require ActiveX and VB script, which have kind of sort of dropped off the radar, and you don't see them very often. It's kind of difficult to find some ActiveXs to get applications to run. The user interface, it's based on the Windows MFC layer, and so that was around the time of Windows 3.1, Windows NT, sort of Windows 95 era and before. So it's looking a bit dated now. Though on the plus side, it does support print functions, so that might be valuable to some of you out there. And WinNTC Server, again, it's C++, but it has a lot of the same features and limitations of WinC. So it's 32-bit, uses 32-bit ODBC sources. Just a note, it uses remote procedure calls to implement, and it's only really of use to a WinC client. Now the Java client, so Java, it was designed to be write one place, run anywhere. So it will run on most platforms, anywhere that has a Java virtual machine. So that could be, it could run on the iSeries, it can run on a Android phone theoretically. So yeah, Java is anywhere. So there's lots of third-party libraries. It's a very common language that is like used a lot. So many libraries and development tools available, and it does require user installation for the Java Swing applications. So if you're just using it as a desktop application, it will require that. But the Java Swing UI is basically the same functionality as WinC. So that UI is looking quite dated right now. It doesn't have support for print functions, and it doesn't run quite as fast as .NET. It's fast, but it's not the fastest we have available. And Java Server, again, many of the same features. It's so basically run anywhere, so you can have your Java client could be running on the iSeries or on Linux server. That's no problem. It can run in the cloud. That's pretty much sort of designed for that. And if you're working with a Java server, there's a couple of people need admitting, Abram. There's a couple of people. Oh, sorry, just letting a few more people in. So yeah, it needs a Java dispatcher if you're using a remote Java server. And then we have the CM web client. So that's a CM first product, which is built on top of the Java client. So it runs in a browser. So It basically will run nearly anywhere that has a screen. So you can run it on mobile devices, obviously PCs, Macs, Linux, even you can run it on a smart TV if it's got an internet browser built in. So you really can run your Plex applications anywhere with Web Client. It's got a modern UI. It uses JavaScript and HTML and CSS style sheets. So it can look like any web application you want. Deployment, very simple. You just have one file that you deploy to the web server, and it's available instantly to anyone in the world. So, and you can also do parallel deployment, meaning that you can have existing users using an existing version, and then when you add a new version, anyone new visiting your site will get the newer version. So you don't have to stop anything to upgrade your application. Scalable, so being a web application, you can add load balancing and other things to, if you get a lot of demand certain times a year, you can do that. I guess one downside is it only got limited MDI support. So if your application is MDI based and you're looking to re-platform, then you may have to rework the interface a little bit, but we have solutions for that. And then we have the .NET client. So that runs on multiple platforms, though I've got an asterisk next to that. There is a program, well, there's the system called Mono, which provides .NET functionality on different platforms like Linux and the System I, though from the talk we had at lunchtime, she brought up the point that it's there, but it's not really sort of supported. It's so it can run, but it's probably not something that you would rely on. So the .NET client's got a modern UI. You can style all the controls in there your own way and make it look like a modern desktop application. The performance is good, and there are plenty of third-party libraries and tools that you can use with it. And with it being a desktop application, it can work with other desktop applications. So you can communicate with like Excel or Word or any other applications. And for deployment, it has click once, which provides just a shortcut that you on your desktop maybe that you double click on, and it checks for any updates. And if there are any updates, it will send those down to the user so they always have the current version of the application. So that's a lot simpler than installing DLLs and things on individual machines. And on the server side, same advantages as .NET. It's pretty good for database access. I think compared to Java, it's probably a couple of percentage points faster. It also is cloud ready. So Microsoft have Azure virtual machines, so it can make the most of that. So to get it to run or to connect to it remotely, it needs a listener service. And then we have the 5250 client. Probably not a platform you'd be looking to re-platform to, though I know a lot of people, certainly in our community, that kind of swear by it. I've known users that just love their green screen, love it for fast data entry, and they prefer that to having to move a mouse around, and there's some value for that, but yeah, functionality is quite limited with what you can do with a green screen. And on the server side, RPG4, still going strong, only for the System I platform. But as we had the talk at lunchtime, they kind of emphasize RPG support's like very important. It'll be going forward for a long time. It's very good performance, database access, and iSeries are just getting faster and faster as we're seeing. So that's still a valid server configuration. Just a kind of summary for replatforming. And this is just my opinion, but I'd say if you were looking, if you're on WinC or maybe Java client and you're looking to replatform, you'd really got two main client candidates for like longevity. There's CM web client and there's the .NET client. So I don't want to like get a crystal ball out and say, what will we be using in 10, 20 years time? But I think I'm kind of safe in saying that the web will still be a thing in 10, 20 years time. I mean, you can come back to me then and laugh at me if that doesn't happen, but I think I'm safe. Cloud is always going to be a thing in the future. So if you're looking to future-proof, then going for a web browser interface with web clients, or then yeah, you can't really lose there. And .NET Client, that's probably going to be around for a while as well with Microsoft support behind it. On the server side, Java is always going to be an option. Again, that's still going to be around in 10, 20 years. .NET Server likely to be around as well. And I think the RPG and RPG4, yeah, they'll be around for a long, long time too. So one thing I'd ask you to consider if you're still open-minded on what platforms you would consider re-platforming to is I'd consider using the same client server. So for example, Java, or C# for your client and your server. Just the reason being that it's the same skill set, the same tools, and that's kind of what I've been working on for the last few years. My main project is a Java client server application, and it just makes the difference between client and server is you don't really need to do anything different. So yeah, I would recommend that. But of course you have options, and maybe if the iSeries is always going to be part of the future of your organization, then RPG is fine. But that's just my opinion there. So if you're looking to re-platform, you've got a few approaches. So one option, and this is one that I've done with a very, very big application, is just made changes in the model in different variants. So this client that I was working for, they have a number of customers all using the desktop application. So we brought web client in, added it to their group models, prepared their functions for web client, but we did that in different variants. So you could still generate and build and make enhancements for WinC and ship those out to the users that are still using the WinC client. But you can also still make enhancements for web client too, just by switching the variants, just doing it all from the same model. So, if someone makes a change in the action diagram to add some new logic, you can just change variants, regenerate it for web client, and you'll get the same functionality. So that approach definitely works. I'm not saying it's simple. There's certainly preparation to get that to work, but Plex does handle it. Plex does work well with multiple variants, but it just takes, it's a little bit of thought when you're making changes. And another approach is a cutover. So what that would be is just basically freezing your model and just saying, okay, from this point on, we're going to re-platform to, let's say, a web client. And if we need to make any changes to our existing application, we just work off a copy of the model that's essentially going to be thrown away, but we'll make the same changes in the new model going forward as well. And that can kind of simplify things in that anything you do is going towards the new platform. But yeah, you're basically going to be a period of time where you've got a model that's kind of out of action, but there are ways to kind of work around that. And another approach you can take towards replatforming, just in small steps. So if you've got like a subsystem or some models that perform a particular business area, then you can do that. You can just convert a bit at a time, as long as your patterns sort of support that. So that's a possible approach as well. So you would just gradually introduce new components, modules to your new platform. So to the actual process of replatforming, and I'm going to talk about these in a way that you can think about preparing. So even if you're not got replatforming on your radar at the moment, there are things you can do in your Plex model that will make it a lot easier for yourself going forward. So most of the main tool, I suppose, in Plex for supporting replatforming is the model configuration. And I know at many places, this is hardly ever touched. You just have your base variants and your base levels and versions, and that's just what you work from. But ideally, you can have multiple variants in here and support multiple platforms all at the same time. So the dream is that when you have everything configured correctly, you will have your model configuration screen. You can go in, you can change your variants. So you can say, I'm still supporting some WinC users, so I can change my variant to WinC. I'll just generate and build those functions and deploy them. The WinC customers are happy. Then I can go back in, change my variant to web client, generate and build, and then deploy those to my web client customers, same application. And that is possible. And that is what I've been working on recently, and it does work. So I'll be talking about some of the things that can catch you out, but that is what Plex is designed to do, and Plex does it very well. So just talk about variants themselves. So variants add a new dimension to the Plex model. So you've got the same objects in different variants, but they can have different properties. So you can have different triples and well, I'll come back to that, but you have different triples, and there's a certain subset of triples which will work differently in variants, but basically any triple that will affect the implementation. So it could be implementation name, packages, function type, a few other triples like that can be changed per variant. Some panel elements, you can have different panel layouts in different variants. So WinC may look one way, web clients may look a different way. You can have large properties in messages, source code objects, and labels. So you may theoretically have different messages for the web or for WinC. Source code objects, you can have maybe Java in one variant and WinC in another, RPG in another. So yeah, Plex will control that if you're sort of switching between them. Also labels too. So action diagrams, entity relationships, they're all untouched by variants. So you'll see the same thing when you're switching between them. And typically the base variant contains the default variant, and then the custom variants override on top of that. So you can make a change in base, like you can assign an implementation name in base, and that will work its way through to other variants. Whereas if you just added the implementation name in the Java variant, then it would only be visible there. So that's a feature, but it can also be a gotcha, because you might be adding an implementation name to a function and you forgot to put it in base, and later on you wonder where that implementation name's gone. So you just have to be aware of that, but that's just the variance working as designed. So to create a new variant, you can just do it in the group model. So you have to sign on as admin, go into configuration, variants. You just give it a name, like web client, Java client, .NET client, for example. And if you want to know which triples are affected in variants, it's the implementation verb group. So in your model editor, you've got your two combos. The lower combo is your verb groups where you can filter which triples you see. So if you set that to implementation, you'll get a subset of all the available triples, and they're the ones that can change per variant. And in the model editor, you can also, if you click on a triple, in the status bar, you'll see information telling you which variant and which level and version that the triple was added. So as I mentioned, you've got to be careful when switching between variants, because if you think you're making a base change, like adding an implementation name to a function that you expect to be the same for all variants, then if you happen to accidentally be in the wrong variant, then yeah, it'll just show up there, and then you'll wonder where it went to. So one of the key things to get right when you're looking to re-platform is the standards layer. So hopefully most of you have your own patterns, have your own standards that you should have, or should aim to have one of your functions in the inheritance path. And if so, that makes it a lot easier to make changes there that can apply to the whole system. So if you're re-platforming, for example, for web client, we add some triples, we add some source code at the beginning. So that ideally would be inherited by all your panel functions. And so in the best case, you can just make these changes in a couple of places, and your standards layer will inherit that all the way through. So all it would take is regeneration to apply that. So yeah, if you are not using patterns to that, then I would certainly plan for doing that, because it'll make replatforming a whole lot easier. So another thing that I've seen people do, and I probably did myself back in the early days of Plex, was manually add language triples. So if you have language WinC on your function and you generate it to the, you add it to the generate and build window, it will generate as WinC. Even if you've switched to the Java variant, it will still pick up that triple. So it's best just to inherit it and allow you to change your model configuration to inherit the language triple. So there's 4 functions that you get in the pattern libraries. So UI basic and storage have client external, client internal, and server external and server internal. These are the functions you should be inheriting from. And in each variant, they've got a different language triple. So just by changing the storage variant, effectively will change the language triple for all your server functions. And these can even be used with O-based functions because there's no action diagram. So yeah, it's, if I say, never manually add a language triple unless there's a special reason for it. So if you want to find language triples in your model that have been added, you can find them quite easily. You can just go into your object browser, set the filter type to system, and search for the language. So in this case, I've got WinC there, and you'll find a copy of the WinC system object in all the different libraries. And then you can just drag those objects onto a model editor, and then just do usage, and you'll see everywhere where they're manually, there's a manual language triple. So that's a good way to find it, and that's a good starting point to preparing a model for replatforming. Source code objects, that's something we have to deal with if we're moving to a new platform. So often they're necessary. So for those that don't know, a source code object will insert the native language into your generated code. So if you've got a Java function, you can insert Java source code object that can maybe do something that's beyond Plex's abilities. So they are useful to have, but if you have a VB script language source code object inside your Java function is not going to compile because VB script has got different syntax to Java, etc. So the source code objects need to be managed, and I'll talk about a few different ways to deal with that. So you can manage source code objects by maintaining them in their own variant. So theoretically, you could have, let's say you have a source code object called like get string length, and that would, you would have different source code for different languages, C#, C++, for example. You could use the same object in different variants, but the problem with that is that the parameters may change between languages. So typically I would create a separate source code object for each language and then use them when they need to be used. And we can use them using what we call varianting. It's a word I use a lot. I don't know if it's actual proper English word, but certainly in the Plex world, varianting is a word. So I'll show you what that is. So with varianting, you can use the plus if meta comparison. And what you can do is say plus if Java client, if that's the name of my variant, and what generation time, if it is the variant you're currently in, it will generate what's inside that plus if statement. So you can have multiple plus if statements in your action diagram, and it will only generate the one that's needed. So I think I've got an example of that coming up. And another option is a source code wrapper, and I'll show you how you can use that. So this is what varianting would look like. So in your action diagram, I've got 3 plus if statements here, and they all use a get string length source code object. And this is fine because when I generate it in base, which is WinC, then it will include WinC code in my generated code, and I won't get any compilation errors. Same for Java and .NET. So, and you can find those variants in your action diagram palette under meta operations, queries, configuration. Another option is to have a wrapper function. So for anything that needs source code objects, you could put them into a wrapper function. So for example, if you've got a function called get string length, it's just a Plex function, and you define your input parameters and your output fields. And then within that get string length, you've got your plus if statements, and they'll do the actual source code insertion there. So all you need to do is call the function rather than having multiple source code objects in all the calling functions. So it's a lot easier to replatform if the fewer source code objects you have. So that's a good way of reducing it. There are a number of source code objects in the Plex patterns. So you got the Win API library, Java API library, and the CS API library for C#. And they all have comparable source code objects. So things like string handling and stuff like that, they're in there. And you can kind of use those if you want to find an alternative in the new platform, then that's a good place to look. Now, one problem moving from WinC to another platform are ActiveX controls. So ActiveX controls are Windows-only controls that need to be registered on the user's machine. So they provide capabilities beyond Plex controls like calendar controls and sliders and other things like that. So I know they are used quite a lot in some WinC applications. The problem is that they don't really translate to new platforms that well. So if you are moving to a web client, then you would have to find an alternate web control to provide the same functionality. And web client does have support for a number of the functionality that ActiveX gives us, like the data picker, the tab strip, flex grid, and the tree view. Those are no problem. And we've done quite a few other ones as well, like the rich text editor. Also for .NET, there is a way to use ActiveX controls by putting a wrapper around it, but it will require different source code. So there's definitely work involved in replacing your ActiveX controls. The active library that comes in the CA patterns, they have different variant versions of the same functionality. So if you're already using the calendar control, you can use the calendar, you can use the active library in a different variant, and it will apply the calendar control for whatever platform you're looking for. But definitely some work is done. And also JavaBeans kind of fit into the same class. So JavaBeans are kind of the Java equivalent of ActiveX's. So they only really work with the Java client. So if you're moving to, let's say, .NET or to web client, then you will need to rework those. Reporting. I know back in the early days, a lot of people used the Plex report functions, which had their own report large property and things like that. That is only available with WinC. They kind of dropped support for that, and just from memory, it didn't work very well anyway. I remember having a lot of problems with that. So what most people do is they use external tools such as Crystal Reports, RDL, which is, I think, report data language or something, which is kind of the .NET reporting tools. That can, yeah, they can do it. They basically work against the database. They're not working against your Plex applications. So if you've got any processing in your report functions, then that will have to be moved out. So it's just another consideration if you use Plex report functions. But I think you'll end up with a better solution anyway. And another consideration, if you're moving to a language like Java or C# is that their functions are not known just by the implementation name. Each function must belong to a package. So it just provides a namespace for a function. So your package can be made up of multiple parts like com.cmfirst.aa1f. And that's the way to address that one function. If you need to call it, you need to know the package and the implementation name. So you've got several approaches for adding packages. There's a package object in Plex, and you can add triples to manually add entities, functions, views. Yeah, I think there might be other things you can add to a package. You can drag and drop those in the object browser. So just if you've got your package object, you can just expand it and drop functions and entities to a package to assign it to that. So Plex doesn't actually stop you having something in more than one package, which is kind of an odd design thing. So you have to be careful with it, but it will only take one of those. So ultimately, the function will only really belong to one package, even though the model may tell you differently. So you've got the package object. There's also a packager tool, which I'll talk about on the next slide, which can do a lot of this automatically for you. And there's another option, which is default packages. So I never used to recommend this, but it's not a bad fallback if you set it up correctly. So default packages basically work as if you don't have a package for your function, Plex will automatically assign a package to it. And that package is based on your local model name. So the problem there is that most developers will have different named local models. So when you generate, if I generate my functions, might be everything under Andrew model.aa1f and maybe Abram model.aa1f. So it's the same function, but it's just made up a package for you, but it's not going to work because it's ambiguous. So there are options in the generate and build window where you can explicitly say what the name of these default packages are, but it's it will only put things in 3 packages, which is fine, but you may end up. Sorry, one question. Sure, yeah. So Abram is a great way to do it. It's going to be fantastic. So.
Sorry to hijack this for a second. I've helped a lot of people moving to this, and packages are typically a very new concept to everybody. And it's a big old pain to literally, one, never use the Plex default packager. You're just setting yourself up for tons of problems. So then people are like, oh, I got to add every function to a package. And then, or they'll be like, okay, I'll just add every function to a single package. Both those things are bad ideas. One, because the first one, individually adding every function to a package just is time consuming. But then adding everything to a single package, because of the way Java works internally in Java Machine, you could share classes between a same package without importing between them. And if your package gets too big, you run into actual like runtime performance problems. So what's the easy solution to this? Just assign each entity to its own package. So if I have a customer entity, you could say, I have a package called customer, contains entity customer, and every function under that customer entity will now be in the customer package. And so it's a good way to, one, only do this maybe a few times compared to thousands of times. And also it's a good way to prevent your packages from getting way too big. So that's my advice to anybody who's trying to do this. Sorry.
So yep, that's a valid way of doing it. So with that, you will get your client and your server functions in the same package, which may be fine for the way that you're implementing. But it's clear to see from there that a certain function belongs to a certain entity. So that's an option. Now there's a packager tool, and I think it's from Plex 7.1 onwards. It's available on your tools menu. And what this does is it will attempt to automatically assign packages automatically. So you can set up various kind of rules here. So you can say what your top level package is. So maybe com.cm first group. And just as a note, typically with Java packages, and probably the same with .NET, is that to keep your objects unique to your organization or to your system, you would normally qualify your packages with the name of your company domain, and it's typically in reverse order. So the cmfirstgroup.com, you would do com.cmfirstgroup, and then any classes we have will not clash with any other similar named classes elsewhere. So just that was just an aside. But then going forward with the packager tool, you can have different packages within that for client functions, server functions, and then kind of miscellaneous functions. So that's basically something that doesn't have a panel, but doesn't belong to a view. So they can have their own package for that. And there is an option here to use entity names. In fact, it's spelt wrong, and it's always been like that, and it's never been fixed. But yeah, no one really complains about it, apart from me. But yeah, you can use entity names, and that will do what Abram was saying, in that it will include the entity name in the package. So the package tool, you can run it multiple times. It actually, if you run it, like maybe you've only got a few entities in your model, it'll assign those package triples. And then if you later add more entities or add more functions or to your entities, you can run it again, and it will update the those package triples to reflect the current state of the model. So yeah, it's coming to the end now. So just a summary here. So the good news is there are plenty of options for adding longevity to your Plex applications. We can still keep the value of your applications, still keep the same assets, the same skill sets. It's obviously very possible, but it will require planning and preparation, as the things that I've mentioned on here. So it's a process, but it's possible, and then you will end up with a new version of your system that will maybe have another, 20, 30 years maybe in the future. But even if you're not planning to repackage, to re-platform right now, you can start applying best practices and think about, the changes you're making. They might work now today, but will they work tomorrow if we moved somewhere else to a new platform? So yeah, best to apply the best practices now. Okay, so I can see there's a discussion going on here. So what are the CPU and memory usage comparisons between Plex Java and C++ RPG? Good question. And the answer is going to be depends, because yeah, I mean, obviously it depends on the speed of your server, etc. But just as a general rule, Java is not interpreted, but it's kind of semi-compiled. It's a sort of byte code. So it's not native machine code, so it's not going to run at full speed like something like RPG or C++. But it's optimized for lots of things. So on a fast machine, yeah, it runs like a native application. But I'm sure it would be slower, but I'm not sure what percentage it would be slower than native code. So, yeah, you'd have to get very similar spec machines to actually do a proper benchmark. But I just know from personal experience using Java client and server. Well, the main system I use for web client has a Java client, Java server that web client is built on top of. They're all the same machine, basically. So you have a web application that's doing all the client work, doing all the server work, and often they have the same database on there, and they can support hundreds of users, sub-second response time. So performance is not really a problem, and you can always upgrade to like faster machine if it is a problem. But yeah, it would be slower than native. Are there any other questions?
Okay, so my question has to do with strategies for taking an existing application and replatforming it over into a web client. And you showed some various options. One of them is the freeze development, which as a developer I would love that, but I have a feeling that our customers, they would not love that. because they want to continue to see our application evolve, and we're adding new customers, et cetera, et cetera. So that would probably never be an option for us. Can you speak to the customers that you've worked with that have done this replatforming, where using varianting and this type of thing, where you kind of keep the existing application kind of intact and yet produce a web client implementation of the same application kind of in parallel with what the customer already has?
Okay, yep, thanks, a good question. Yep, so this is one of the approaches here where we use different variants to switch to a new platform. So with the system I worked on, big system, it's got about 2,000 screens that we converted for web client. So the approach we took was we added the web client group models to their group models. And first we went into their pattern libraries. We added new variants for the pattern libraries, went in, made the changes for web client that are needed for that. So they were really only visible for the web client variants. So the changes did not affect the WinC code. So they would still be using the base variant of their patterns. So the patterns take care of probably about 90% or 80% of the conversion, because most functions just have basic patterns. They don't have source code objects, ActiveX, anything like that. So in those cases, you could just switch the variant of the pattern library and regenerate, and you'll get the new web client version of that. And then, so that got most of it. And then you have the last 20%, which is probably the 80% of effort, using the 80-20 rule. And that's where you deal with individual cases where you've got source code objects, where you've got ActiveXs, things like that. They had reports that we had to kind of rework the Java. So yeah, those we sort of dealt with in again, just using a variant within the model. So we would just do things differently in that variant, again, without affecting the WinC side of it. So yeah, it was, I say, a big system. I'm not kidding, they've got like 30, maybe 30 or 40 models in there. And so it took like a few years. So, but the process was that first, all the customers were WinC, they all had desktop applications. Then they had a few like beta customers for the web and got them on there, and they probably find a few problems at first. And then as we kind of addressed those, we had more and more customers moving over to the web. And obviously with all the advantages of the web, that was the way everyone wanted to go. So as of right now, I think they are like 90% of their customers are now in the browser, and they've got a few legacy users who will be switched in the next year or so. And then going forward, it'll be web clients all the way, and they're not going to be doing WinC development at all. So that'll make things a lot easier, because yeah, that is going to be the main platform. But it's set up for the future now, and they'll get many years out of it. So, yep, any questions there? Any more questions? I can't really speak a lot. Sorry, in case you didn't pick that up. The question was going from like DDS to JDBC environments. So DDS would be working with native RPG codes to directly talk to the database, as opposed to JDBC, which is kind of the Java equivalent of ODBC for database access. I can't say I've really worked on a lot of projects that do that. I mean, for performance, I'd imagine DDS is quicker, but with JDBC, you're working with SQL. So yeah, it makes it easier to work with other databases. If you decide to get off the I-series, then you can use maybe SQL Server or Oracle or one of the other ones to do that. But yeah, I don't have a lot of experience of DDS as such. Any more questions? So, okay, so I guess I'll wrap up. I took pretty much the whole hour. So yeah, thanks everyone for sticking with us. I think we're done for presentations for the day. We're going to do some summary or recap, I think. Sorry? Yep, we have the checkered flag coming up, so there's more to come. So yeah, I'll just leave this channel open, and yeah, I'll sort of sign off this for now, but yeah, keep watching, there's more to come. Thank you.